Joseph II, a revolutionary free thinker, crowned emperor who opposes his mother's policies.
These are the personalities I love because they're neither black nor white.
His sister,
Marie Antoinette,
embodies the lifestyle that inspired the French Revolution. The Habsburg Empire is also facing a threat.
His destiny was to combine the era with the monarch.
It's a time of lavish ceremonies, terrible poverty, and a ruler who radically transforms his kingdom.
Der Adel behandelt die Menschen wie Tiere. Die Kirche hält sie dumm und abergläubisch.
He was an emperor born a century early.
Rebellion, ambition, a vision for the future. What motivated this reformer? Slavikovitz, Moravia, 1769. The Roman Emperor of the German nation, Joseph II, is on his way to an important event, a historic meeting with the Prussian King Frederick the Great, his mother's arch-enemy. The future of Europe is at stake. What is Joseph planning? The 7 Years' War claimed over 1 million lives on the continent. The Habsburg monarchy, the French Bourbons, and the Russian Tsarina had gone to war against the rising powers of England and Prussia, a response to the War of the Austrian Succession a few years earlier, in which the Prussian King Frederick had taken the wealthy territory of Silesia from the Habsburgs.
Joseph II was born in the middle of the War of the Austrian Succession. His mother, Maria Theresa, was the last heiress of the Habsburg Empire, and in the understanding of the time, it was therefore actually completely unthinkable that a woman could really rule and hold together this enormous empire. That is to say, although her father ensured that the European powers recognized his daughter as heiress, they had nothing else to do but take up arms immediately after his death and threaten this empire, trying to divide it up among themselves.
Joseph eagerly awaits the meeting. Even as a 15-year-old, he recreates Frederick II's glorious battles against the Habsburgs on the game board, while the War of the Austrian Succession is unfolding, much to the outrage of his mother, Maria Theresa. The Austrian heir to the throne is impressed by the military strength of the Prussian king, as well as his closeness to the people and his social reforms. In addition to the armed conflicts, another problem emerges. The farmers' fields no longer produce any yield. The war has taken its toll. Poverty and enormous famines plague the country. The continent is worn down, and both Joseph II and Frederick the Great know they must react. A turning point is imminent.
Joseph II was known to be an admirer of Frederick the Great, which was a thorn in his mother's side. She considered Frederick the Great her greatest enemy. He was an enlightened man. That is, he stood as someone who corresponded with the leading intellectuals of Europe, with Voltaire, for example, with whom he was in contact.
In Silesia, today's Poland, the two monarchs meet in the Prince-Bishop's castle of Nysa. How should previous wartime enemies greet one another amidst the hierarchical tension between the Roman emperor and the Prussian king? Surprisingly, they embraced each other like brothers.
I think this is, of course, connected to the relationship with his parents. On the one hand, he had an overbearing mother, and on the other hand, a father who was the exact opposite of Frederick. Francis Stephen of Lorraine was a very sociable, friendly person, a person who enjoyed pleasure, who really was a Baroque ruler who liked to live to the fullest. He wore these expensive robes, and he was actually an effeminate courtier of the Baroque. If you lived as a modern person in that time and wanted something completely new and different, this new ideal, that is what Frederick embodied. A soldier inspired by the ancient world. That was the image that appealed to Joseph and that he wanted to realize for himself.
The two monarchs spend 3 days together in Nyssa, discussing the balance of power in Europe and the danger of revolutionary outbreaks. The serfdom of peasants is the problem of the hour. But while Joseph strives to break the power of the nobility, Frederick strictly advises him against it. The dependence on money and serfs would be too strong in the event of war. What will Joseph decide?
These are really two monarchs who are very similar in some aspects, but then psychologically very different.
Here are the letters that Emperor Joseph addressed to his mother, with the reports of his encounters with Frederick II. One letter from 1769 reads that, in the eyes of Joseph II, the king was a genius. Yet both rulers state in their remarks that they act very cunningly. Also, Joseph calls him a crook on one occasion. And Frederick II, in his letters to Voltaire, for example, is not very restrained about this either.
Frederick writes about the almost 30 years younger emperor. Europe will be in flames when he assumes his sole regency, but also he is an emperor like we have not had in all of Germany for a long time. With 3 sisters preceding him, Joseph was born with a great responsibility already on his shoulders in 1741.
Ein Sohn! Es ist endlich ein Sohn!
All hopes now rest with the heir to the throne.
There had been no male successor since the birth of his grandfather, Charles VI, for 56 years. So Joseph really was a long-awaited Messiah, a son at last.
The empire is in desperate need of a Messiah, for in addition to Frederick, Bavaria and Spain are also threatening the rulers in Vienna and laying claim to Habsburg hereditary lands. With the newborn Joseph in her arms, Maria Theresa delivers a flaming speech in the Hungarian parliament. She asks for military support for the threatened Habsburg Empire and succeeds.
This is something that's more or less given to the heir to the throne as a warning sign. He was probably also aware of it from his education and growing up, that his position is fragile and must be placed on a firm foundation.
Even as a child, Joseph is considered headstrong and unruly. From the very beginning, his position in the family is singled out.
I believe that Joseph, by birth and of course by the role into which he was guided from the beginning, I will be the future emperor and I will be the regent of all these dominions in the great monarchy, considered himself to be someone chosen and special.
The Prussian envoy at the Viennese court, Otto Christoph von Podewils, also describes the young Joseph as haughty, unyielding and lazy. This reflects the general perception of the young heir to the throne in his childhood. Only his father, Franz Stephan von Lothringen, seems to recognize the true nature of his son. He chooses the educators and teachers for Joseph and creates an atmosphere of freedom and tolerance in which libertarian thoughts are welcome. Joseph can grow up as he wishes. In contrast to Joseph, his father is reserved in political matters. He leaves the affairs of government and war to his wife, Maria Theresa, and experiments with new forms of economy, above all to increase the family's fortune. While all brothers and sisters of the young heir to the throne were prepared for the Habsburg marriage policy from an early age, Joseph's first priority was education. His teachers Johann Christoph von Bartenstein and Christian August von Beck taught him with modern ideologies from abroad. For the first time, he learns of duties of the ruler towards the people, as opposed to a claim to power derived from God. He also studies Roman history and learns how to run an empire. Does he suspect that even great, seemingly indestructible empires can fall? Both teachers are middle-class and Protestant converts, living examples of tolerance towards other religions for the heir to the throne.
There were also repeated arguments about what Joseph should read and what he was allowed to read. Maria Theresa was of the opinion that those evil French texts should not be read. Franz Stephan was much more tolerant and open-minded in this respect. In the end, this meant that Maria Theresa did not really interfere in the educational program. It's to be assumed that she was not quite aware of how natural law-minded Beck had been. Natural law means men are equal before God and all have the same rights, which was a very revolutionary message.
Hat das Herz am rechten Fleck.
Sein Herz mache ich mir keine Sorgen. Es ist das Hirn. Das Hirn, das sich immerzu mit diesen Flausen vollstopft, mit Rousseau und Voltaire, mit diesem ganzen modernen Philosophengesindel.
Maria Theresa selber verlässt ja kaum.
Maria Theresa herself hardly ever left Vienna or her court. And Joseph II takes a radical step there. He creates an image of what takes place outside the courtly world. He recognizes this as an essential basis for his reforms. Only if he can somehow complete this image and have an insight into what's happening outside can he live up to his legitimacy and drive forward this general prosperity.
Joseph gains insight into the world of his subjects. He leaves the court incognito. He observes everyday life and distributes his pocket money among the poor and the ones in need, a behavior that intensifies the conflict with his mother.
Eure Majestät?
Allein, ohne Begleitung, ohne Insignien, ohne Schutz. Der Erbe des Hauses Österreich ist also der Meinung, sein Leben ist etwas, mit dem er spielen kann. Was soll das heißen?
Eure Majestät sehen alles, was in Ihrem Reich passiert? Seht ihr auch die Kinder, die im Dreck verrecken? Deren Mütter, die sich prostituieren, um sie zu ernähren?
Untersteht ich mir, unterstellen zu wollen, dass mich das Elend meiner Untertanen nicht kümmert. Es ist die Politik im Großen, die die Welt verändert.
Die Politik seid ihr.
With this image, he formulated his first political program at the age of 22. His so-called rêveries, or reveries, are the political blueprint for a modern state in which all people have equal opportunities and rights. The capable are promoted and the powerful are stripped of their power. Everything is based on personal merit, he demands, thus attacking the worldview on which Maria Theresa's claim to power is based. For him, power derived not from God, but from his subjects. A revolution from the top of the hierarchy?
The reforms would have gone much too far for Maria Theresa to have approved. The basic idea was that he strived for equality of mankind, which was attempted a little later in the French Revolution, a reality he already envisioned.
So it was not really a dream, but a revolutionary state program that ultimately aimed at the disempowerment of the nobility.
Les seigneurs que j'attaque, that is, the nobility I attack.
Throughout his life, he remained faithful to his rêverie, the political combat program of a 22-year-old. They're clearly the fruit of his years of apprenticeship. Was Franz Stephan aware of the course he had set for the conflict between mother and son? Were there possibly also political reasons, as he had recognized the turn of the times?
For Joseph II, the ideas of the Enlightenment that were circulating in his time and which he was taught through his upbringing created a very important foundation. That is, on the one hand, it is the purposeful education of the heir to the throne on the basis of this idea. And on the other hand, it's also the curiosity and the thirst for knowledge that's associated with seeing what situation his future reign will be in.
Hattet ihr nie den Wunsch, einem höheren Prinzip zu folgen? Wolltet ihr niemals mehr tun?
Nein. Ich habe einfach immer nur das Beste getan, was in meinem Vermögen stand.
Nun, das ist mir nicht genug. Ich möchte dem Staat dienen.
The Empress leaves her son no room to act. He is to submit to her politics, according to the honoured Habsburg motto, Bella gerant alii, tu felix Austria nube. Let others wage war, thou happy Austria, marry. The carriage with the bride of the heir to the Austrian throne is on its way to Vienna. The Habsburgs are planning a splendid wedding between Joseph, the future Emperor of Austria, and Isabella of Bourbon-Parma. The marriage is a purely political move. It is supposed to demonstrate the strength of the monarchy and strengthen the new alliance with the former arch-enemy, France. The groom resists.
Ich freue mich schon darauf, mit deiner Braut Italienisch zu sprechen.
Sagt ihr auch das ab. Ich denke, dass die Ehe nicht der richtige Weg für mich ist. Eine Frau ist eine Ablenkung. Ich möchte mich auf die Regierungsgeschäfte konzentrieren. Reformen, mich um das Reich kümmern.
Nun, du wirst heiraten, Josef, für das Volk.
Ja, aber was, wenn ich...
Wenn du das nicht willst, kannst du sehr gerne Priester werden und Leopold deinen Thron überlassen, falls dir die große Politik doch zu viel ist.
I don't think there was a single royal estate in Europe at that time when Joseph was of marriageable age where people could decide whether they wanted to marry or not. They had no say, and the choice of spouses was a political decision that required multiple alliances. After all, that's what the French Revolution was for, where the children of a monarch, and above all of the most powerful women in Europe, acted so they could decide who to marry. It was a display of power politics that could certainly cost something, because it was worth just as much at the time as a war won. Here you can see the unbelievable ceremony and effort that went into staging this wedding. In the middle is the beautiful young bride with many carriages accompanying her, with all the important people who of course had to attend. It costed a lot of money, but it had to be done. Because Joseph was, after all, the heir to the throne of all the Habsburg hereditary lands, and he was the presumptive emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and as such he had to be staged accordingly with his bride.
The 6th of October 1760. The bride and groom have never met, nor spoken to each other. Joseph's fate will take an unexpected turn that day.
Mein Sohn, zum Bewundern ist später noch Zeit. Den Ring.
It seems that Joseph's marriage to Isabella will change him. She knows how do you say, not give so much to his mistakes and steer him without him noticing. She was very, very skillful at it. It seems to me that many people didn't recognize him from that moment.
Et d'ailleurs, beaucoup de gens ne le reconnaissent plus. 5 years later, the triumphal arch in Innsbruck commemorates the turning point in Joseph's life. His father, Franz Stephan, dies in 1765 during the wedding celebrations of his brother, Leopold, and Joseph suddenly becomes the new Holy Roman Emperor.
For Joseph II, this is the turning point that the triumphal arch symbolizes. Because on one side it is the old, the Baroque, and on the other side it is the divinization of his father and the inheritance he has taken on with it. A personal legacy, but also an inheritance of reign, which to a certain extent represents a burden and a mission at the same time.
The reading of the will reveals that Joseph has been chosen as the universal heir. Franz Stephan, one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his time, leaves 22 million guilders to his eldest son. Today's value is something in the hundreds of millions of euros. Joseph continues to act consistently in the spirit of his ideals.
Befreie das Land von Schulden.
This, I believe, is something quite indicative of the sense of duty that Joseph II displays in his reign, in that he doesn't distinguish so much between Joseph as a private citizen and Joseph as a representative of the state or as the head of the state. He invests a large part of this sum, which he inherits from his father, in the affairs of state and covers the accumulated national debt with it.
Deckt damit die angehäuften Staatsschulden.
Joseph now formally rules over Maria Theresa as Holy Roman Emperor, but the Habsburg head still remains his mother. Does she not think of abdicating? Why? Does she want to stand in the way of his birthright, to break his will to reform? Does she see her life's work as being threatened? And is she perhaps even endangering the monarchy with her resistance?
Ich habe schon gehört, was du willst.
Ja, ich gehe auf Reisen.
Also gut, ich werde dir ein Gefolge zur Verfügung stellen.
Nein. Allein. Inkognito.
Das ist absolut ausgeschlossen.
Mutter, ich habe keine Angst vor meinen Untertanen.
Es ist gefährlich und es ist nicht standesgemäß.
Mutter versteht. Ich muss weg. Ich halte dieses Ganze... Ich muss weg.
Joseph travels throughout Europe. What is he running from? He uses the opportunity to gather the knowledge he needs for his reforms. No monarch of his time would travel as much as he did. He travelled 50,000 kilometres across Bohemia, Galicia, Italy, France, the Austrian Netherlands, and even Russia. Following the examples of the inspection journeys of his idol, Frederick the Great, he explores the living conditions of his subjects, foregoing any luxury. He wants to remain unrecognised and travels incognito as Count Falkenstein. In 1770 and 1771, 2 crop failures in Bohemia caused 600,000 of its 4 million inhabitants to die of hunger. Bohemia is the heart of the empire. Joseph sees the cause, once again, in the greed for profit of the nobility and the sloppiness of the authorities. As a result, he has grain delivered from Hungary to alleviate the need.
In the course of this famine, which he gets to see for himself, he realizes what problems now exist, not only on the part of the state, but also a very basic problem, at least as far as Bohemia is concerned, is the serfdom and the subjugation of the peasant population to the landlords. This means that this old system no longer works.
The serf peasants contribute the majority of their labour to the landlord, in addition to taxes and horrendous fees. Joseph sends his mother an undersized loaf of bread from Prague as a demonstrative sign of steadily rising grain prices. It is a symbolic alarm signal for the public as well. He foresees the danger of an imminent revolution. Will Maria Theresa finally change her mind?
Mutter, ihr müsst sehen, wie rückständig unsere Länder sind. Der Adel behandelt die Menschen wie Tiere. Die Kirche hält sie dumm und abergläubisch. Reformen funktionieren nicht. Sie können nicht funktionieren, ehe wir die Leibeigenschaft abschaffen.
Die Leibeigenschaft abschaffen, Josef. Wenn wir das tun, dann bringen wir den gesamten Adel gegen uns auf und das können wir nicht machen.
Im Gegenteil. Wir müssen.
On his travels, Joseph passes through Moravia and he stops in Slavikovitz near Brunn because a wheel of his carriage breaks. A famous event follows. Joseph descends on the harvest field and grabs a farmer's plow to work the field himself. All those present cannot believe their eyes. The emperor as a farmer, a picture that will make history.
Joseph II's travels bring him closer to the people, so to speak. But now he's not a humanist per se, who would be concerned about the physical well-being of the people, but he is quite pragmatic. In the 18th century, the capital that he needs to shape the state can only be financed through agriculture, in other words, through the peasants and the subjects. That means that every improvement of the subjects and of the peasant subjects ultimately results in a better design of the state, as it was conceived by Joseph II.
Increasingly, there are heated arguments between the dominant mother and her ambitious son. Does she see herself as the caretaker of her time, which threatens to disappear with Joseph's ideas? How long can she hold her own against his ideas? He threatens to resign several times.
She took many of his ideas too far, and he took her reform program too slowly. That is perhaps how it could be summed up. But there are areas where they have cooperated well, and I would say that these were the areas of education policy in particular. It was also important to Joseph that universal compulsory education is implemented. That is where they work together. They also cooperated well on the issue of legal codification. It was a great concern of Joseph's, this unification of the law. There were the main frictions with regard to the Catholic Church, although here too it cannot be overlooked that it was Maria Theresa who reluctantly but nevertheless expelled the Jesuits. She would certainly have protested if she had known how radically Joseph would then proceed with the abolitions of monasteries.
Was machst du da? Solltest du nicht in deinem Arbeitszimmer sein?
Die Arbeit kann noch etwas warten.
Woran arbeitest du gerade?
An dem Toleranzpatent.
Warte bis nach meinem Tod, dann veröffentliche es.
What always raises questions for many historians, including myself, is Joseph's relationship with his mother. That is, a relationship of love and hate. Basically, when his mother is dying, he's by her side and cares for her during her suffering, with much sorrow and much attention.
Beaucoup de chagrin, beaucoup de, à mon avis, d'attention.
I stopped being a son, and yet this was what I thought I was best at.
Joseph wrote on the 29th of November 1780 when Maria Theresa died. A moment he may have longed for several times, and which now came to be.
Wer begehrt Einlass?
Maria Theresia, eine einfache Sünderin.
Sie soll eintreten.
At the beginning of his sole reign, there is less excitement and perhaps a bitter conflict of conscience, although no one stands in his way of fulfilling his mission. When Frederick II hears of the Empress's death, he exclaims, "Voilà, a new order of things."
If Louis XVI had been like a brother-in-law to Joseph II, there probably would not have been a French Revolution, at least not in the form we know today.
In France, people are already unhappy about the monarchy 3 years earlier. Joseph II visits the royal couple in Versailles. Marie Antoinette, favourite sister of the Habsburg Emperor, was married off to the French court at the age of 14. Joseph had not seen his sister for 7 years. The alliance between Austria and France is battered and demands an heir to the throne. Joseph is to remind his sister of her marital duties. Rumour has it that she fills her days mainly with fashion and banquets.
Joseph visited France as early as 1777, basically going to the French court to check on his sister's behavior, because he had heard in Vienna about her, shall we say, frivolous life.
Apparently, Joseph must have instructed the French king in matters of love, because shortly afterwards, Marie Antoinette actually became pregnant. The Habsburg Emperor makes headlines for turning down a room at the estate. He's too curious about the capital, Paris, and the life of the common people. At last he is in France with his trend-setting ideas. How will the country of philosophers receive him? Although he travels incognito, all of Paris knows about this noble guest. Stories tell of a memorable encounter with the so-called fishwives, in French, poissardes. They will get the signature of the rights of man from the king more than a decade later, during the French Revolution. Did this make him even more sensitive to the needs in his own country? The emperor is impressed by the modern French factories, hospitals, and harbour facilities. Is this the root of the inspiration for his architectural reform plans? His experiences at the Hôtel Dieu, the oldest and largest hospital in France, lead to a constructional measure in Vienna. In Paris, he comes across overcrowded patient beds, with the poor and sick lying next to the dead. These grievances are taken into account in Vienna. Joseph builds the General Hospital, the most modern hospital in Europe at the time.
There was fresh air. There was only one bed per person, and that's an unbelievable innovation for people who were poor and who did not have the money to pay the hospital. There was also food for these people, and in order to avoid the mistake of the Hôtel Dieu, where everyone was on top of each other, they were accommodated in individual wards, which were also clearly demarcated.
Wurden sie in einzelne Abteilungen, die auch bestimmt abgegrenzt waren, aufgenommen.
The emperor also founds his own academy to train military doctors for the Austrian army, the Josephinum. Are his health policy ambitions part of a larger plan? While Joseph successfully implements his impressions from France, he cannot convince his brother-in-law, Louis XVI, to leave the court and learn about the predicament of his subjects. The etiquette at the French court is too rigid and insurmountable. The royal couple live completely detached, unaware of the living conditions among their own people. In fact, before his return to Vienna, Joseph left a 20-page message for his sister Marie Antoinette with the words, "Prevent the revolution, otherwise it will be cruel." His words are a prophecy.
When he looked at the situation in France at the time, he told the future king of France in private, "If things go on like this, a revolution will break out."
12 years later, Paris is in flames. The storming of the Bastille marks the beginning of the French Revolution. Joseph comments, "It serves my brother-in-law right. It must be the same for all those who let their ministers rule." How hard must it have hit Joseph that it is his favourite sister who goes down in history as the symbol of a lifestyle that ultimately led to the revolution? The great fearful image of the European nobility and monarchs has become reality. From one day to the next, nothing is the same as before. But how was it possible that Joseph foresaw these events so precisely, that he had already discussed the danger of revolution years before at his historic meeting with Frederick II?
Dein Vater wäre stolz auf dich.
Das bezweifle ich.
Er hat dich sehr geliebt, Josef. Weißt du, als du klein warst, da haben wir so oft gestritten, weil ich viel zu streng mit dir war.
Daran kann ich mich nicht erinnern.
His motto, which Joseph imposed on himself as Emperor of the Habsburg Empire, is Virtute et exemplo, by virtue and example. His goal, to promote the common good through comprehensive reforms. He tries at all costs to maintain contact with the people throughout his co-regency until he becomes the sole ruler. In the process, he turns out to be a vigilant strategist. Perhaps even a reason why Joseph might have staged the ploughing in the field for media effect. Did he want to style himself as a peasant liberator? Is the legend of the emperor at the plough, in the end, an elaborate propaganda?
The ploughing was very popular. It was an absolute sensation. No one had ever done it before. The news spread throughout Europe, and especially to the cradle of the Enlightenment, to France. There, the well-known physiocrat Dupont de Nemours immediately reported on this event in his newspaper. He even expressed the conviction that the future French king, whom he still calls Dauphin in the article, could show such a gesture towards the common people. And indeed, Louis XVI allegedly ploughed a similar furrow in the palace gardens at Versailles. The article went on to say that all rulers of Europe who want to see their people happy should behave in this way and promote the ideas of the Enlightenment. He seeks to build a structure of government that is not shaped from the bottom up, which is governed from the very top. But he recognizes in his idea and in his interpretation of the Enlightenment that the welfare of the people is also a gain for the state.
A visionary emperor's clever moves, which began in the youthful reverie at a time that Joseph was later to describe as his happiest.
Ihr dürft nun die Eheringe miteinander tauschen.
There must have been a spark. That was the human thing about him. He adored her immensely.
A belated honeymoon takes them to Marie Antoinette. They spend carefree days travelling together through the beauty of the Austrian provinces. In the months that follow, Joseph even seems to forget politics. Isabella is his friend, advisor, and even someone with whom he can discuss modern ideas in governance. They are soulmates.
Eins, zwei, drei, jetzt! Pressen, Eure Hoheit, pressen!
In March 1762, Isabella gives birth to a child.
Ihr habt eine Tochter, Hoheit.
The happiness lasts only for a short time. Pregnant again, Isabella falls ill with smallpox and has to give birth prematurely, and dies shortly afterwards in childbirth. After only 3 years of marriage, Joseph is devastated.
He loved her very much, also as an intellectual partner. She expressed very modern views regarding the education of girls and the education of princesses. And it may well be that these enlightened ideas were also partly influenced by her.
But that's not all. Joseph, who seeks refuge in the love of his young daughter, is struck by fate again. At only 7 years old, she dies of pneumonia. Joseph is said to have cried out in pain to heaven, "Oh my God, give me back my daughter."
With Isabella, he was broken-hearted when she died. Then, with his daughter as well, that was really the end of any hopes he might have had there.
Well, he really had to put up with many strokes of fate. When his elder daughter, Marie Therese, died, he said, "This is more than I can bear."
From then on, politics became Joseph's only purpose in life. He devotes his entire life to the state. In a realm which I govern, prejudice, fanaticism, partiality, and slavery must disappear, ruled according to my principles, so that every one of my subjects may be employed in the enjoyment of his natural liberties. He proclaims these demands when he takes over as sole ruler in 1780, after the death of Marie Therese. Now he lets go of his last emotional concerns. He strikes a decisive blow against the existing world order in his empire and issues a patent of tolerance for religious freedom in all Habsburg lands, which causes ripples across the entire continent. This was followed by a church reform that would rethink the church system.
Joseph II begins with a great reform which of course massively affects the church. He mainly closes those monasteries which, in his opinion, do too little for the general public. At the same time, however, it's important to him that he doesn't close the monasteries as if he were collecting the money for himself, but that he invests the money resulting from these monastery closures in the training of pastors and in the maintenance of church structures.
Joseph has 700 monasteries closed that are not involved in education or nursing, and founds 3,000 new parishes instead. Many monks have become beggars, but the emperor goes even further.
He reduced the number of Catholic holidays because he thought it was a sign of laziness. That was a phenomenon. There were close to 150 public holidays per year at that time. For him, as an enlightened thinker, This meant an immense economic loss. In this measure, he didn't fully understand the mentality of the people he governed. And he actually believed that he could convince the people of the advantage and benefit of these measures through his reform steps.
Univerzálnosti a hlavně o výhodnosti těchto opatření.
When Joseph even bans the popular pilgrimage to Maria Zell, something historically unique happens. Pope Pius VI comes to Vienna in person to reprimand the emperor. But this makes little impression on Joseph. Does Maria Zell possibly remind him of the beautiful days with Isabella during their honeymoon? The emperor isolates himself more and more. His second wife, Maria Josepha of Bavaria, whom he marries for dynastic reasons, he cold-bloodedly ignores throughout her life. He even stays away from her funeral after she dies at a young age from smallpox. The only woman he will be interested in is Princess Eleonora von Liechtenstein, who turns him down. He seeks satisfaction with the so-called public girls, who tend to repulse him.
I think that Joseph was a loner. He is said to have gone to the whorehouses of Vienna. Well, that was his right. He existed both as a man and as a ruler. But I don't think he was really a man with a strong libido.
Findet bei jedem etwas Gutes.
Was? Selbst bei mir?
Ja. Eure Traurigkeit.
Eventually, his concern to reorganize life in the empire takes on obsessive features. He issues around 6,000 decrees and laws, that is roughly equivalent to 2 per day. He feels responsible for everything. His soldiers are instructed not to use too much powder in their personal hygiene. In 1786, Joseph even banned the production of gingerbread because it was bad for the stomach. What has become of the plow-wielding folk hero of yesteryear? Has an absence of love and security changed him? In the meantime, resistance is stirring throughout the empire. The nobility in particular is banking on a counter-revolution. The Habsburg Netherlands, in essence today's Belgium, breaks away from Vienna. In Hungary, the nobility refuse to pay taxes. To make matters worse, in 1788, mobs stormed the Viennese bakeries because of increased bread prices. Joseph is forced to revoke most of his decrees. Only 10 years after his mother, he too dies, haggard and lonely. With the announcement of his death, a sigh of relief is felt throughout the entire empire. He is buried in an unadorned coffin in the Capuchin crypt at the foot of his parents' Baroque casket. One of his last letters reads, "Convinced at heart of the integrity of my intentions, I have the strength to hope that after my death, posterity will think more favourably, impartially, and consequently more justly than my contemporaries about my deeds and examine my aims."
Joseph II may have personally experienced himself as a failure on his deathbed, but one cannot say at all that his program failed. On the contrary, his reforms laid the foundation for all that then became reality in the late 19th century, and which ultimately led to the modern democratic constitutional life of the 19th and 20th centuries.
In fact, it would take until the March Revolution in 1848 58 years later, to eliminate the last remnants of the feudal state which Joseph had initiated with the abolition of serfdom. It was not until long after his death that the revolutionaries referred to the headstrong emperor and his vision on social issues. He was glorified as the reform emperor par excellence.
Joseph was, of course, a visionary, a great politician. He was a great reformer, and he has become kind of a legend because of that.
Joseph II was perhaps, as one novel said, born a century too early. His way of thinking could probably have saved the monarchy anywhere.
La monarchie, un peu partout.
Through his ideological zeal and uncompromising determination, Joseph loses the hearts of his subjects. But with his revolutionary ideas, he extends the lifespan of the Habsburg Empire by more than a century. Joseph II, the rebel emperor.